talking about the I am statements of Jesus, and last week we looked at the I am statement where the metaphor of bread was used, and we looked at some of the theology of bread. It was, I thought, for me at least, a helpful discussion. Today, we want to look at the statement where Jesus says that he is the light of life. And I want to look over the next few weeks at the theology of light that is very frequently discussed in the scriptures. This equation of light with God is seen, as I said, throughout the scriptures, from everything from the first page of the book of Genesis, where as the first act of creation, God creates light, all the way to the end of the book of Revelation, where the earth made new is an earth with light that in which there is no darkness, and that light comes from the throne of God. So we see this throughout the scriptures. This concept of light is equated with God. It's equated with goodness. It's equated with holiness and so forth. We're going to look at that over the next few weeks, hoping perhaps to see something about God or something about ourselves, which would be illustrated in that metaphor. It's interesting, not I think for discussion today, but certainly for discussion in the future, that the creation of light, as depicted in the book of Genesis, occurs on day one. The celestial bodies are not created until day 4. Yet vegetation is created earlier. And so whatever this light is that seems to be not the same thing as the sun, the moon, the stars, has vegetative power. It has life-giving power. Again, something that I think we'll look at. I want to also look at the relationship between light and fire, because we see those being brought together as an evidence of the presence of God. We mentioned a little bit about that when we talked about Moses and the burning bush. And I want to talk a little bit about the inner light, which the Quakers equate with the presence of God in the soul. I think this is again a theme that we see elaborated throughout the scriptures. The admonition of Jesus for us not to hide our lights, that we shouldn't put our light under the bushel, but that each of us essentially are light bearers ourselves, is again something I'd like us to look at, letting our light shine, so to speak, and looking at other aspects of light, meaning the contrast of light with darkness, blindness throughout the scriptures. The lack of ability to see because there is no light reaching the eye is again part of this great metaphor of light that I think sheds I think good information concerning the goodness and the graciousness of God. So these significance of light, even refracted light, which, because at the very end of the scriptures we see the throne of heaven is surrounded by a rainbow. A rainbow is light that has been refracted, and there is, I think, some significance. We'll maybe talk about that as well. Light which is broken into its component parts. What does that mean? But today I want to go to maybe what is the most direct story concerning the relationship between light and Jesus, who was again the person who makes the claim that he is the light of the world. And that's the story of the Transfiguration, which is found in Matthew chapter 17. It's also found in Mark chapter 9 and in Luke chapter 9. And I'm going to read the passage from the book of Mark. The passages are remarkably similar, given the fact that many stories that we see in the Synoptic Gospels have, some significant variation. This one is one which has a fairly consistent description of the event in each of the various Gospels. But I'm going to read it in verse 9 because of one passage, and it begins in Mark 9, verse 1. And it was saying to them, "Truly, truly, I say to you, there are some of you standing here who shall not taste death until they see the kingdom of God after it has come with power." And 6 days later, Jesus took with him Peter and James and John and brought them up to a high mountain by themselves, and he was transfigured before them. So what is this transfiguration? "And his garments became radiant and exceedingly white, as no launderer on earth can whiten them." The idea that no launderer on earth can whiten them is a direct illustration that this is a supernatural whiteness. This is something that the best bleach, OxyClean that you have can't make this kind of whiteness. This is supernatural whiteness. This is the demonstration of the light that we're talking about when Jesus makes the claim that he is the light of the world. And Elijah appeared to them along with Moses, and they were talking with Jesus. And Peter answered and said to Jesus, "Rabbi, it is good for us to be here, and let us make 3 tabernacles, one for you, one for Moses, and one for Elijah." For he did not know what to answer, for they became terrified. Interesting that this is Peter's modus operandi. Whenever he gets anxious, he talks. He's a talker. Then the cloud formed, overshadowing them, and a voice came out of the cloud, "This is my beloved Son, listen to him." And at once they looked around and saw no one with them anymore, except Jesus alone. So this story has, I think, a number of aspects that lend light on the subject of Jesus being the light of the world. This word transfiguration comes from a Greek word from which we get our word metamorphosis. So this is a change from one state to another, and this metaphoro, which is the Greek word, is a word, as I mentioned, that indicates this transformation. It means to change or to alter. And the setting for this story is familiar on some mountaintop in Judea. Don't know where the hill is, but there are many good-sized hills, and this apparently is occurring at night. One of the questions in my mind is, what is the purpose of this transfiguration? For whom is this charade being carried out? Is this something for the disciples? Is it something for Jesus? Is it something for the crowds waiting down below to hear about this event, which is a supernatural one, has some kind of purpose? And I'd like your thoughts about that. Moses and Elijah show up. Jesus lights up. God speaks up, and Peter shuts up. This is the basic summary of what this story is about. Peter, James, and John find the whole scene a rather horrifying one. James and John are paralyzed in fear, and as I said, Peter does what Peter always does, and that is he starts to talk, and he actually starts to blabber. But Peter wants to do, I think, what is such a common thing that mankind wants to do when you have a moving spiritual experience, a so-called mountaintop type of experience. We want to memorialize the event in some way, build a temple, build an altar, put up a cross, do something that will memorialize this, and he suggests making 3 tabernacles, one for Elijah, one for Moses, one for Jesus. You see here, in his view, Elijah, Jesus, and Moses are sort of equivalent. They're all prophets. They all should be venerated, so to speak, equal in standing, perhaps, all to be revered. And for a good Jew like Peter, Moses and Elijah represent the anchor of the Hebrew Scriptures, which is the law and the prophets. So we see the law and the prophets being sort of demonstrated metaphorically here by the presence of Moses and Elijah. These 2 characters, Moses and Elijah, have had their own mountaintop experiences. Elijah at Mount Carmel, where he has the encounter with the prophets of Baal, and Moses on Mount Sinai, where he encounters God and the delivery of the 10 Commandments. So the mountaintop experience is something, again, which is a familiar theme here. But Moses and Elijah are not here for transfiguration. This transfiguration is designed to distinguish Jesus from the prophets of the Hebrews. This is a attempt to show in the clearest possible terms to the disciples that Jesus is divine and that he has a divinity which is greater than and is apart from the kind of reverence that they hold Moses and Elijah in. This brightness of light is attributable to a characteristic of God alone. Throughout the Scriptures, as we've mentioned, from Genesis to Revelation, God is depicted and described as light. He's described as brightness. He's described as whiteness. He's described as fire. And from Genesis to Revelation, he's depicted in this metaphor of light. This is not simply a metaphor, though, it seems, but it seems that this is a fundamental attribute of God, that is the light. It is metaphorical, but there is also something real about the fact that light and God are somehow an equivalence. In the book of Revelation, as I mentioned, we see the rainbow surrounding the throne of God, this kind of refracted light, and these refracted elements, the red, the blue, the purple, and so forth, I think have some meaning, and we'll talk about that maybe in one of the upcoming sessions. In the book of Genesis, in the creation story, we see that the light of God is fundamental to the whole of creation. It is the first order of creation and seems to be the sustaining power of creation, as we mentioned, this being true because even the vegetation will grow under the influence of this light when there is an absence of the sun. This God calls good in his pronunciation of his creation. Then that goodness, the goodness of God is seen in that pronunciation as well. The Lord is good and merciful. That the Lord is good and merciful is as a theme replete throughout the Scriptures, and particularly in the Psalms we see this over and over. His slowness to anger, his greatness and his loving kindness, his mercies over all his work. And we see that the sustaining foundation of all of creation is epitomized by this illustration of the light of God. So we see this light then as the underpinning, the bedrock, the enabler of creation, and is an evidence of the goodness, kindness, merciful love of God. The creation of the things of creation cannot occur without this foundational energy which comes from the throne of God. Here on the Transfiguration Mountain, the light of God is again divinely revealed, and there are 3 witnesses to this, which, according to the book of Deuteronomy, is required to authenticate any kind of event. Nothing can happen in Jewish law without at least 3 witnesses, and so to have three witnesses is an important part, I think, of the story. As Peter waxes rather eloquent with his soliloquy about building a tabernacle for each of the prophets, God himself speaks up and intervenes and stops Peter short. He speaks up, and as I said, Peter has to shut up. But God speaks from the cloud. This is the same cloud, it seems, that was the cloud that led the Israelites through the wilderness, and we see there the presence of God as well. The mountain of the law and the mountain of the prophets are now brought into a contrast with the presence of Jesus, because what happens is that as the cloud dissipates, there is no longer Moses or Elijah there. And when God speaks from the clouds, he has a very specific message. This is my beloved Son. And as you recall at the baptism, he says, this is my beloved Son, in whom I am well pleased. Here he says something quite different. This is my beloved Son, listen to him. And he says this, as I said, in the context of the presence of the law and the prophets. And as the cloud goes away, the law and the prophets are gone as well. And what we're left with is a very specific statement, Jesus alone. And we see that statement, Jesus alone, in the book of Mark. We see that statement, Jesus alone, in the book of Matthew, and we see it in the book of Luke. So I think it's, at least in my mind, an unmistakable declaration by God that Jesus is not equal to the law and the prophets, that what he has to say, listen to him, is something which is far deeper, far greater, more divine than what you would expect to hear and understand from the law of the prophets. The meaning, I think, of the transfiguration could hardly be clearer. Jesus is God. His divinity is divined by his supernatural brightness. His message and his character are not the equivalent of Moses and Elijah, as stellar as they are. His message and his ministry is superior to the law and the prophets, and the message is that Jesus is unique. He is the foundation, the sustaining power of all the creation, and it is his goodness, it is his mercy, it is his kindness, it is his overwhelming love that is demonstrated here in this transfiguration. It's interesting too that nothing more is needed than Jesus alone. And I think this message is the message of the transfiguration, that the light that is the light of God, and when Jesus makes the claim that I am the light, it brings a great deal of simplicity to the message of the gospel. I was thinking about David when I was thinking about these thoughts earlier. David's always chiding me for going to stories which have some kind of obtuse meaning, or maybe even David might claim meaninglessness, and to stick to the simple stories of Jesus and his simple ministry. And here is God sort of agreeing, I guess, with David. So you're probably on good terms. No other teaching, it seems, is necessary but Jesus alone. There is only one light. Jesus alone is the one, and there is only one Savior. That is Jesus alone. So I'd like your thoughts this morning as we maybe begin a study a little bit on the subject of the theology of light, and using the transfigurational story as an illustration of this kind of penetrating brightness, which is supernatural and is the personhood of God. The book of John, in its first in the first chapter, which we have alluded to many times, bears this out in a very poetic way as well. In the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God, and the Word was God. He was the beginning with God, and all things came into being by him, and apart from him nothing came into being that has come into being. And this is the key verse. And in him was life, and the life was the light of men. And the light shines in the darkness, and the darkness did not comprehend it. There came a man sent from God, whose name was John, for he came as a witness. That's John the Baptist, of course. He came as a witness to bear, that he might bear witness of the light, that all might believe through him. He was not the light, that is, John the Baptist was not, but came that he might bear witness to the light. There was the true light, which coming into the world enlightens every man. So this goes back to, again, the notion of the inner light, this being a light which enlightens every man. So here we see that Jesus is the dispeller of darkness and the source of all light, including the inner light. I'd like your thoughts on this metaphor of light, and thoughts concerning maybe the story of the Transfiguration, but in a broader sense, the meaning that Jesus brings to the statement that I am the light of the world, and that he is the sustainer of all things with that light.